Well, thank you guys so much for having me and for gathering here. I'm really pleased to be able to have all you guys in this space. I am an environmental educator by career and by soul, and I found my way into the Parks and Recreation Department with that purpose in mind. And so when I started working for the city of Mount Vernon almost 3 years ago, we had plans to make an environmental learning center in Bonnie Ray Park, and that's just kind of starting to unfold. So thank you guys all for your flexibility about the change in location. I was really excited to show you all that space, and hopefully maybe at one of your next meetings I might have the chance to do that. But our renovations got held up a little bit, as they often can do, and so that's why we had to switch locations. But I just wanted to briefly tell you guys a little bit about what we have planned at Bonnie Ray, and then just invite participation from anyone who's called to kind of help be part of this process. So Bonnie Ray, you may have passed it on the way here. It's a very underutilized park that we've had for about 10 years. But people haven't really gone to it because we had residents that were renting the house. There's a sign that says private residence. There's, not really a parking area. And so a lot of people felt like, this is somebody's house, I can't really go here. Those tenants are no longer living there, and we're starting the process of renovating the garage and then later the house building, into a public environmental learning center. Really, really excited about that. I mean, for me personally, it's a huge passion project that I've always dreamed of. My mom was an interpretive naturalist, and so it kind of just runs in my bloodline to be really excited and nerdy about nature. And a center like that's going to pull in a lot of people who are also interested in those type of things. So I'm really excited about that. Our plans this year are that we're going to be renovating the garage into a classroom space. And then we're also going to be installing a pea patch garden and a community educational garden. So some of our dreams for the community educational garden are to have a native plant garden with some interpretive signage that'll help people get to know both some of the more common and some of the more unique native species that we have here. And we'd also like to install a sensory garden that would be for kids to kind of inspire nature-based play. It would have a lot of open-ended provocations for kids to, get to know things around them. So part of it would be, an aromatic sensory garden. Part of it would be like a digging zone, ways for kids to kind of get their hands in the dirt and get involved. So those are the plans that we have this year. And the way that I wanted to invite participation is that we're always looking for input, especially with your expertise in native plants. If you have recommendations of certain species that you'd like to see planted, especially ones that have cool educational features, that people might want to learn about, I'd love to hear that. We're always open to hosting work parties, so if someone wanted to host a work party and invite members of the public or just host it amongst your group, we'd love to get some garden beds actually, installed and put in. But also just there's a wealth of expertise in this room, and I wanted to put out there that if anyone was interested in offering programs, workshops to the public about different gardening topics, something along these lines, gardening for wildlife would just be really exciting. We're going to have a big presentation space, and we're always looking for things that are going to engage people. It doesn't have to just be kids, it's for adults, families, kids, whatever. So I will have a stack of my business cards, and if anyone feels like reaching out to me, I work for the City of Mount Vernon Parks and Recreation, and I would love to hear from you guys just about what you'd like to see in this environmental learning center as it kind of comes to fruition. So thank you guys so much, and I'm really pleased to be here.
The next person I'd like to introduce is Nan, our outreach coordinator, and she has some volunteer opportunities that she wants to speak about.
Yeah, I love it when we have a chance to get together in person, and I can make this quick. We do have a bunch of outreach stuff going on and starting up more. Right now, I just wanted to do a shout out to Darcy and Karen for helping me install the display at the Marysville Library. So this whole month of March, we have our Salal chapter native plant display. I put a picture of it on the table if you want to see when you go out what it looks like. We had fun doing it, and so that's for the month of March. And then in April, that same thing is going to migrate up to Burlington for that library. So we just wanted to get outside in the community. You're gonna install that, aren't you? Anyway, does anybody want to help Brenda install it? We'll talk about it. I didn't put a sign-up sheet out there for that. I don't think.
I didn't say I would help.
You
but-
say you would help. Well, we'll work it out. We'll talk privately. But if anybody wants to, it was fun putting it together. And anyway, but what is back there are sign-ups for. Back there is on the table. There's some sign-up sheets that have events and dates. And if you're able to just help in a little bit, it would be great. Many hands make light work, and these aren't really big things. But the first one coming up is, what's the one? Oh, you have the Conservation District. Somebody just, what date was it?
No, I think the first one is May 25th.
No, March, I'll go in there's one I'm missing, but in order. There's April 22nd for Earth Day. We have a booth, thanks to Bob. He's helping to organize Earth Day at Skagit Valley College. So what that would look like is he'll take care of getting all our display materials set up there, but we'd like about 4 people that can put in a couple hours during the day to be at the table. And we got lots of fun stuff just to, talk native plants to people. And don't worry if you're, like I was a couple of years ago, thought, I don't know what to say. We've got plenty of materials and talking points and a partner. You're not going to be alone. So a sign up is there. If you can do that, just put your name down on the sign up sheet and we'll get in touch with you. Then there's another one on April 26th. That's one for the Anacortes Street Fair, just a couple hours in the afternoon. Again, there's a couple of us already that will take the the table. There's a lot of environmental groups. It's just 2 hours in the 4 to 6 on April 26th. And then also that same day, earlier in the day, is when Brenda could use a hand with 1 or 2 people just at the garden. She's got a training.
The Conservation District training class for backyard habitat, which
Backyard
is really,
conservation.
yeah, an engaged group of
Yeah.
people that could use another hand to just help them docent them around the garden and explain what we're doing there.
Perfect. So if you're able to do that, the dates and all are on the sheets back there on the table. And then you have a separate sign up for the plant pickups. There's a lot of activity going on with our plant sale. And so I'm keeping that separate from the outreach, but here's a chance for you to mention.
There's been a tremendous response to the sign-up that went out for Sign-Up Genius form to fill in for helping pull orders, where we've recruited more people per time slot for pulling orders, and then keeping the sale pickup help the same. There's still a few openings if anybody wants to get on the list to get that Sign-Up Genius form to see where you can plug in and help out. I'm happy to send it to you.
And then just a couple others. In May, so I know this is a couple months away, but it comes up fast. May 10th, we're gonna do the Master Gardener Plant Fair. That's out at the Skagit Valley Fairgrounds. And we could use a few people, again, to be at our table for a shift with somebody else. And it's just fun for doing that. That date sign-up sheet is back there. And the other one is on Whidbey Island on May 17th. And this is for what they call Wings Over Whidbey. And there's a lot of booths set up outdoors at Kuka. Everyone been down to Pacific Rim Institute? If you haven't, it's worth going just for that. So it's another environmental fair. This is Audubon and a lot of conservation groups are there. So again, we've got leaders on this that can get the materials there, but if that's fun for you to help sit at a table and have native plant stuff, or bees, or butterflies and pollinators, or any of the stuff that goes with native plants. So all those sign-up sheets are back there. And,
So Nan, if someone wanted to just find out more about those and they weren't sure about actually signing up for a single one, is there a way they could say, hey, could I just be on a list to notify me when I'm,
good, thank you for
yeah, if you're not ready
bringing
to
that up.
commit, but you kind of want to
And
know,
I
be in the
do-
know?
That's
of
right,
when these
I
things
should say
happen?
that. I have a list of emails of people that are just like that. It's like, oh, I don't know, I can, that might be fun once in a while. So if you'd like to be on that list, the best way is just to email me and say that. Do all of you get the newsletter? Raise your hand if you do not already receive the newsletter for this chapter. Okay, hey Lauren, we're connected. I will get in touch with you though. The rest of you though, there's my email and information about outreach is in the newsletter. So if any of this is like, maybe something you'll think about, put me on the list, then I just send out an email and say, hey, we got this coming up. Anybody want to help? That's the way that works. Thanks for
Great, yeah.
Thanks, ma'am.
Thanks, Nan.
The next person I'd like to introduce is Lauren Fuel. He's a certified arborist, and he's going to do a workshop after the talk. Lauren, would you tell him what your plans are?
I'm just here to advocate for trees, as we all should, and talk about, it's great. I'm really excited to hear what all of the presenters have to say in terms of planning, thinking experiences through their own gardening. When it comes down to the actual nitty-gritty of planting, often there's a bit of a gap in knowledge, so that's what I'm hoping to kind of fill in by talking about things to think about. We'll do a little bit of a kind of a whiteboard presentation up here, and then I have some examples of plants and some pots that we'll kind of practice planting in the garage for anybody that wants a more hands-on approach to that.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Yeah. All right, without further ado, we're going to begin our program.
No, you go.
Oh, you don't want me to do it now? Oh, okay.
No, just Brenda's first in the program.
Gardening with plants.
You looked at me and I'm not
Sarah,
talking.
sorry, just confusion.
Yeah, you're great.
I thought, standing back there, I realized that maybe people in the back can't see as well. That's too
Is
high.
that better?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's good.
That's good.
Okay. So yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt Bob in his introductions, but so I'm Brenda, Sarah, and Virginia will be the presenters today. So before, the very first thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit short history of the display garden. And before I do that, I have one more plug for volunteerism, and that is our historic records for the chapter and for the garden construction are all, of course, pre-digital age, and they're in notebooks and files, and some of it may not be of importance to keep forever, but we'd love to have a volunteer who's interested in going through those and saying, oh, this is significant, this not so much, and then Kristen has offered to scan those, or if you have a scanner, you could scan them. So at least we'll have them on record. And then we have a Google folder that those things can be put into. But just, right, and including there's like a great big map that a surveyor made for the gardens, things like that we'd like to have in a form that will we can carry forward and readily access. So after the program, if anybody, as we're talking with Laura and stuff, if anybody's interested in that kind of a geeky thing you can do at home, please let me know. We'll hook you up with the files. So, as I said, I was going to talk about the garden and the history of that, how it got planted and so on. How many people have been to the display garden? Most people. Yeah, good. So it's out on, for those who haven't, it's out on Memorial Drive next to the WSU Research Station. In the front is a big Master Gardener display garden. There he goes. And then that's probably about an acre and a half or 2 acres, and then the native plant garden is a ½ acre behind it. So I won't belabor this too long, but here's our display garden. This is the master garden area up here, and this is the research station, the auditorium, if you've ever been in a program, like the Master Gardeners Know and Grow series and stuff like that is in this building here. I can't remember what year that was built, but I just wanted to show you what we started with. So here's this just ½ an acre. Our nursery's here in the back. There's the Quonset hut you might be familiar with in the research station. watch, these greenhouses have been here for a really long time. So the next picture, note the greenhouses. So this is 1969. This is what they started with. So completely flat, farmed field, impacted by the glaciers first and then by farming. So it's very compacted, poorly drained soils, but blank slate. So there were later pictures from like the 1990s that I could have put up, but they're so blurry, they were worse than the 69 picture. So it was that way until the garden. Louise isn't here. I wish she was like the one person who has the history in her head still. But it was probably in the late 90s, the Salal chapter members decided to try to build this display garden. I think master gardeners were already doing those. So in 1998, they had meetings and decided they were going to invest and build this garden. It's on property owned by WSU, but they let us garden there for free, no expenses, and in fact, they're very supportive and helpful to us. So in 1999, they started, just to go back to this picture, they started constructing it. And so most of these pictures are from like 1999. And they're, I don't know if this would be like where arbor vitae hedge was planted at the back of our garden. You can just see how dramatically things have changed. There's the pavilion that the master gardeners have. If you're familiar with the display garden, you walk through it and you would come out here and enter our garden over here. So this is the Montaigne area. Initially, the garden was set up with different regions in mind. There was like a seaside region, a honeysuckle region, a grassland, a Montaigne area that Rohr Irgens planted. And if people are familiar with that, these are the little mountain hemlocks that were planted. I can't believe how small they started with those. And now they're 15, maybe 12 feet tall.
So just 25 years old.
Yeah, so 27.
27.
Yeah, and here's another historic picture of the bridge and the pond, if people have been in the garden. So we still have that same bridge. We haven't had to replace it yet. And we have put screening on it to make it a little less slippery. And here's kind of what that area and that bridge looks like now. A few things I thought we should just, learn from some of the things that we did in the garden over the years. Probably, so this is our entrance area. It looks a little different now because we have a graveled path, but as you enter the garden, it's become a very shady garden. So it probably started out very sunny and some plants were put in, went to town, planted very close together because it was a new garden and they wanted things to look good and right away. But that means that now at 25, 27 years, Sarah and I are going through and making hard decisions about let's take this whole tree out, let's take these shrubs out. But one of the things we did that was pretty helpful was, it's such a dark picture you may not be able to see, but
Would it help for us to do some lights?
yeah.
The light switch is right next to you for those,
Oh,
and then I can get the other ones.
Yeah. So at the entrance area, when you first walk in, so this is that same entrance, which I'm going to ask Fred to get us some wood to replace this signage there. It was kind of bare ground with experiments and different kinds of plants. And what we learned was if we moved all our sword fern to the front, they're evergreen, they're easy to manage. If you want them to look really tidy, you can always clip off the old dead fronds, but we barely even bother with doing that. Maybe we'll do that on the very front row of them, but leave everything else back. So there's this nice mixed hedge, and then subtending it is this sword fern area. It's become zero maintenance. I mean, it's just so easy. We hardly ever have to do anything in that area. You disagreeing?
Oh, no. We were thumbs upping the zero maintenance.
Yeah. Another kind of trick that we learned for maintenance-wise, I mean, because it's all about like how many volunteers can we keep going after some things like horsetails. How many people have horsetail in their yard? Yeah. So this is an area with aspens, a small grove of aspens. That's a whole nother issue about aspens and suckering and all that stuff. But underneath the aspens is a bed of horsetail. And when I first was working in the garden with volunteers, we were just futilely trying to at least make it look nice by taking horsetail out, or digging or clipping it off, all these different things you can do. And one of our volunteers noticed that this meadow rue was growing up in a patch just at the edge of this aspen grove, and it was growing as fast as the horsetail was and completely hiding it. So the horsetail is still there. If I had another picture, and I'll try to get one this year, that you can see horsetail in the background, but this meadow rue spreads rhizomously, and it's now covering this whole area. And it's a very attractive plant with these little flowers that hang down. So during our plant sale pickup, which is always the first weekend in May, we can hardly keep it in stock because it's the prettiest right then. And everybody says, I didn't buy that, I want to buy some, do you still have some? And so meadow rue was a really good low maintenance solution to the horsetail.
I was thinking some people might wonder about that it's okay to leave horsetail, but it may not, like other plants you may not want to leave. Like things that might seed around and really become hazardous to other parts of your garden as well. So like we've left the horsetail knowing it's not going to make a really big impact elsewhere, but like if you had like that lily, the lords and ladies, what's that with the red little berries
Arum?
on it? Yeah, the Italian arum.
Yeah.
Like Italian arum, you wouldn't use this same strategy
Right.
because that would then impact other parts of your garden. It would send its seeds everywhere, and that's one that you'd want to.
Yeah, and I guess if horsetail is a native plant, and if it was non-native, we probably would take more efforts to keep it under control or get rid of it.
Right.
And in fact, if we see, so horsetail has fertile and infertile fronds, for better lack of the stems, and so the ones that have spores on them, which are the fertile ones, I try to, all of us try to clip them off and dispose of those. You can just clip it off and put it in a bucket and take it away from the garden because that's how it spreads via spores. But the non-fertile, the infertile fronds, which are just the lacy ones, you can actually, if it's unsightly, you can just tear them up and leave them on the ground. They just compost. They don't have the ability to spread. So they don't come to life and sprout roots. You can just leave them to compost. We try to take less and less material out of the garden. We took 2 trucks loads of prunings from a hedge I'm going to show you in a minute, but this week. But if we had the ability to chip those and keep those on site, we certainly would. So.
Question, how do you, is it the meadow rue, how do you spell that?
So the word meadow, and then R-U-E.
Okay.
And there are lots of cultivars of meadow rue with different colored leaves and such, but the native one is very pretty. There's nothing wrong with the green, beautiful. And it's male and female, but if you get a few plants, you'll get a mixture of them. So they have different flowers.
Are the horsetail spores on the male or the female?
Well, it's not male-female.
It's not. Okay.
It's fertile-infertile.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, that's the female, but that's not how it works.
And you should put them in the trash, not your.
Yeah. They're the ones that they look like a club that is brown, and when you shake it, spores just fall everywhere. That's the fertile one that you want to clip off. But I have to say, after years of doing that, I hardly ever see any. Yeah, we hardly have any in the garden. I mean, we have horsetail, but none of the fertile fronds. So here's a little story, like lesson learned. How many people have a pond on their property? Like even a tiny one? Well, some of the original founders of the native garden went out and collected some really interesting plants and installed them in the garden. This is a very, very pretty plant called bog buckbean. I don't know the scientific name. I'm usually better about that, but I see this like on DNR properties where there's forested wetlands and bogs, and it has this gorgeous flower and a very pretty foliage and everything, but it just took over the pond, as you can see in the previous picture, to the degree where we couldn't see open water. And I actually worried about people like stepping into it thinking it was part of the garden or something because you couldn't see the water. And so we had a work party, and Fred is here. He's in this picture. There's Fred. We got, I got a portable pump, rented it, we pumped the water out, as much water as there was. There wasn't really that much water in there. And then a bunch of us in here, Joan and Kerman and Tim, we just physically removed all this buckbean root mass, and it required using hand saws to cut it into pieces small enough to lift into a wheelbarrow.
Wow.
And we composted it on site, but still, it was just amazing. So I'm afraid I went to take a picture of the pond now just to show you a contrast, but it's winter, things don't look that great. So when you go to the pond now, though, we've tried to replace, we have wapato, which is a duck potato. It's an edible. If it ever gets out of control, we'll just have a party and serve a duck potato. But it hasn't gotten out of control yet. It's quite small. And there are several other plants, including water shield, which is a really pretty plant that grows in there too. So it's given us a place to grow other pond plants besides buckbean.
So is the lesson then that because it's a native plant, but it's just, it needs a...
I would never recommend, so lesson for us...
But it needs a large,
yeah.
Where is it? It needs a big...
I guess it might not take over a pond that's really deep, maybe.
Okay.
So lesson is, this is a demonstration garden, and we're trying to show things that people can do in their home garden, and I would never want somebody to put this in their home garden. So,
Same with the aspen.
right, yeah, we don't sell aspen. Yeah, there are certain things that, good to experiment with, but lesson learned, we wouldn't recommend this. So it's, as I say, it's a gorgeous plant, and I love seeing it in the wild, but I wouldn't put it in a small garden. Another historic picture I wanted to show you guys, some people early on in the founders, this guy Jay is still active with the fruit orchard next door, but he brought in a big log that they put upright as a perch for raptors. And what I wanted to point out here were the red osier dogwoods, these little twigs here. And that's Louise that's standing there. So the raptor perch has fallen down. It fell down a couple years ago and has become one again with the garden. But the red osier dogwood hedge is a really nice winter display. And I'm afraid we didn't prune it for a couple of years, and so we had some catching up to do. So we're back to kind of spindly looking red osier dogwoods right now, but I think by the end of this summer we'll see that kind of hedge again. So the red osier dogwood older branches turn kind of brown or yellowish, whereas it's the new growth from last year that's bright red, and that's what you want to encourage. So, and the last thing I wanted to talk about with the garden is making things more accessible. So for years we've had a chipped path through the garden, which is fine, but it does get, it's very, as I showed you in the first pictures, the garden is in a poorly drained area. It can get waterlogged, and the chips can get really soggy and very soft. And it wasn't really encouraging people to come in from the master garden. So the master garden area, they had put in a gravel pathway a few years ago. So we extended that with the great help of contractors. We used the funds from our plant sales to hire a couple young people to put in this gravel pathway. That's worked out really well. So it goes continuously from the master gardener area into ours. The entire garden isn't treated that way. There are still some chipped paths, but at least there's a loop with a couple of patios like that people can enjoy. So that was just a little brief history of where the garden is now. If anybody wants to volunteer at the garden, we have an email list where I just send out a note saying, Sarah, here's our work parties coming up. You don't have to respond. You can just say, okay, yeah, that's a date that works for me, and I'll show up, or not.
And it's a really good transition. It's a really great way to not only meet people and be outside. In fact, I got involved in 2020 in the middle of everything but being shut down, but the garden was not shut down, so we were able to, and a great way to learn more about plants and gardening, both from working in the garden here and the people, they all share knowledge about what's happening in their garden, so you can learn a lot.
And Sarah often makes it a delicious soup. We often have soup at her work parties.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to talk about a project that I worked on when I moved here. Here's the arrows. So this was my house. I hired some very lovely contractors to remodel our house, and we moved in May of 2020, and I basically had a blank slate. It was not a big agricultural field, but it was this parking strip, which was literally a parking strip. They parked their cars on the parking strip, so you can imagine how compact it was. So I live in Anacortes, and so this is south is over here, and east is over. This makes sense to you. So the sun rises from this side. So this is a very hot, exposed section, and I wanted to create a garden. I wanted to create some screening from the road to my house. I wanted to create a sanctuary space that I could go and just be with the plants and learn more about the plants. And so I set about reading books and looking online, and Nan created this excellent little sheet that has all kinds of great resources of books, websites with for gardening with native plants, as well as the bugs and things that are and birds that come and visit them. So if you haven't picked that up from the front table.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, just to expand.
Yeah.
So we, some of those books, that's a collaborative project that, with input from everybody who's got experience. So one place, and there's our website on there, tons of great resources. So you can grab one of those on the table on your way out.
Yeah, the WNPS website on their landscaping section has got very specific plant lists for, like, if you live with a septic system, what can you plant on top of it? If you have like dry and sunny, or if you live at the seaside and you get a lot of salt spray, it has very specific plant lists. So pick up one of these resources before you go.
And some of the resources are on the table
Yeah,
too,
they're
to look
on
at.
the table up front. So just like the big garden, this was not a straight line. Gardening is not a straight line, right? So some things work, some things don't work. It was an experience in flexibility and adaptability. But first, I do what y'all think about, which is like, what's the mature size of the plant? How much sun is it getting? What are the highs and lows? How much rain does it get? Where I live, I have hordes of deer that walk by, and then I've got dogs that walk around. So basically, what plants will grow, and then I started thinking more about what plants belong. As I got more involved with the Native Plant Society, I got to thinking more about like what actually belongs here. Because this, like, what plants do I love? Historically, I love a lot of plants that have a lot of sentimental value for me. Relationships with, my grandmother, they mean a lot to me, and I love having them near me. So my garden is not a 100% native plant garden, because some things I just have personal relationship with. But that's why I put this question, why? They're plants that I love, but why? Why do I love these plants? It's something that's meaningful to me. And then also, why do I love them? Plants now that I love have changed, because now that I've lived in Anacortes for only 4.5 years, I've spent enough time walking around the land that's around me that I like creating something that belongs there, right? So the plants that I see out on my walks in Washington Park, or out in the community forest lands, I want those there too. It's almost like I belong with the plants that belong there too. So that's this. Plants that I love is shifted to what is I want. So a lot of what I did was walk around my the parks to see what grows. And this is my parking strip just a few days ago. It's winter, so not a lot is leafed out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through each of the different islands that are here. And I put in wood chips. Originally I put in hog fuel. These are bright red because I just replaced them this last fall. And the hog fuel is actually really great for creating soil. I had about 120 feet to cover, and this is about 12 to 15 feet wide. So the plants that I picked are really great at spreading, covering ground, which may not be great if you only have a patch of, soil this way. But I embrace this notion that Brenda mentioned with putting all the ferns together, which is creating swaths of plants. So it's also much easier for weeding, or just making sure the plants have the right space. Is I have a swath of one species here, I have a swath of another species here. So that way I don't have, sorry for my mathematical, but it's like I don't have A, B, A, B, A, B. I have like A and B. So that way A gets lots of room, and I don't have to keep it from fussing with its little brother in the back seat. It's like they get the whole section.
That's better for the pollinators too.
And right, it's much better because if a whole plant species, is blooming at a time, the pollinator does not have to find the plant here and then find the plant there or find the plant there. It's all the blooming plants are right there, and then the next couple months, the other plants are blooming over here. Thank you for that reminder. Yeah. So let's go down. So here's on the corner. I've got Romer's fescue, which seeds really well and creates a nice year-round visual, right? It also keeps a lot of weeds out. The shrubs that I chose are Pacific wax myrtle. This one has gotten large enough that the deer only browse the lower part. I use this wire around shrubs and trees when they're young until they get above deer height. This is bare because I had lavender growing here, and when we had that deep freeze 2 years ago, the lavender got nixed. So I thought, I'm not going to put lavender back in there. I'm going to take more of what's doing well and belongs, right? That was a sentimental plant, but I still was like, I love the lavender. But I thought I'm gonna make more of what really belongs here and have the garden have more of an integrity to itself, right? So the Romer's fescue, I have in lots of different areas here. The wax myrtle works really well, very drought tolerant. And then all of this low growing plant here is Cerastium arvent, which is starry chickweed. And when it's in bloom, it's a delightful little white flower. And it's a really easy plant to just take and stick another, to move it around to other spots. So it's a wonderful ground cover.
Question?
Yeah.
It looks like there's a lot of mound up. Did you
Yes.
bring in soil?
Thank you for that. I forgot to tell you about part of my adventure with this. So when I was at the very beginning of this project, when it was all what looked like just dead grass, I did the cardboard sheet mulching. And a great place if you want to get cardboard is in the back of a furniture store, because they open up all their big chairs and stuff that comes in, and they just put huge pieces of cardboard into the bins in the back. And I just asked them hey, can I take your cardboard? Sure thing. And so I just hauled off big pieces of cardboard, and then I put, a couple, maybe 4 or 5 inches of mulch over the top. And then the next spring, I went to dig into it, and I discovered that the first 80 feet of this was gravel. It actually was not soil underneath all that dead grass. It was gravel and just whatever had decayed matter on top of it. So then I was like, what am I gonna do with this? Gravel. And I've actually contemplated, am I gonna haul this gravel away? No. No, this is work with what's on site, right? So I did take my pickaxe, because I had all this matted root matter in that gravel. You can imagine what was there after my house was built in 1930, so decades of driving on there and just, weed matter. So I did take a pickaxe and I pulled up as much of the matted root mass, because that was just going to come back and come to life. And what I decided to do was I mounded it up. So I took the idea of choosing plants that would survive on very thin soils, like what you would find out in Washington Park and Anacortes or other places that have rocky balds that have been scraped by the glaciers and have very thin soils, right? So things that don't either have a lot of deep roots or things that once they grow through can grow through basically rock, right? Because that's what the gravel is, it can just grow through the rock. So you might wonder, then how do I have shrubs here? Well, this is an experiment. I did chip out of the gravel a big circle, and so these are basically potted plants in the gravel. I pulled out gravel about this wide and about this deep, and I put soil in it and potted the wax myrtle, and I thought I'll give it enough soil and space to grow some roots, and then it's gonna have to grow into the gravel the way it might, like on a seashore, right? Or even when you go out into the rocky balds, eventually those tree roots, they are just hitting rock, right? And they have to find their way. So that's my experiment. So there is a slight mounding in order to provide some soil for these other plants. All right, other questions there? Yeah.
Therefore, did you have to water?
So yes, the first few years, I watered this for the first couple of years. This is my first year. I think last year I really didn't need to. We did not have that heat dome. And otherwise, everything else has become adapted to just live there. So there are plants that will just go brown. That's what they do, after they're done in the summer, and then they just come back, in the following year. So you can see like the Cerastium arvens, it's kind of brown right now, but it will just green right up and bloom. Probably.
What soil did you bring in to put over the top?
Yeah, so I used, some people try Sunland. I happen to use Skagit soils, and I just did a topsoil. Yeah, I did just did topsoil. Yeah, I would hazard against using. So I already had some compost that was on site, and you actually really do not want to over nutrient your plants because they will grow more robust than actually you want them to, right? Specifically thinking of, we'll get to the middle island, which has Pearly Everlasting, which does not need any more nutrient at all. Okay, so there are bulbs planted here that I'm super excited that are coming up, some of our native bulbs. They're just starting to sprout up there. Okay, so as you come down, there's that Pearly Everlasting that's here. This is that Cerastium arvens. There's fescue, the Romer's fescue in the back. And this, if you're not familiar, is the nodding onion. And so year-round, it has the green foliage, right? And then in a couple of weeks, this will be a sea of pink, right? The nodding onion flowers that are all in there. I planted the ocean spray because this island garden is still in that gravel bed, so it has a small potted plant kind of experience for that. There are 2 of those ocean sprays in there, and the deer go after those too, so I'm still just waiting for that ocean spray to get above height. But yeah, the sea of pink is beautiful in a couple of weeks in there.
Before you move forward, I was just going to say I'm going to be sharing a link to this presentation as well as a video, so if you are trying to furiously take notes, I'll be making this available to everyone. So,
yeah, and then Virginia and I think we have plant lists that we can share with folks too if we send that out. All right, and then the next island, this is a big patch of kinnikinick that grows here, and the brownish patch is the mountain avens, which has this other really beautiful white bloom. And we have this growing at the demonstration garden, and it grows right in our parking strip garden, which is why I knew it could grow here, because our parking strip at the demonstration garden, it goes from being flooded in the winter to just being baked, non-irrigated at all. And it does well there. So I thought, okay, that'll grow there. The one plant that I'm stretching its tolerance. Like some plants you'll see, oh, this plant is supposed to be, part shade with this amount of moisture. But the way I learn about the plants is I will look around at nature and see where I see it. Because a lot of plants you will see it in a variety of different ecologies, right? Like ocean spray, I see it out in the baked hot sun. I see ocean spray also in the shade, right? So I think it would work. I am trying to grow cascara out here, and I am irrigating it because this is not where, this is a stretch for this cascara to be out in the sun like this. so far, it's surviving. So if it doesn't work, I will okay, stop fighting the nature and choose something that wants to grow there. Yeah, Lauren.
So why are you choosing to fight the nature? Is it because of
Why am I
personal
doing it?
attachment to Cascara?
Well, yes, and because the pollinators love it. So I'm hoping that if I can stretch it and it will take, so I'm really irrigating it these first few years, but once so, we do have a water table, and I feel like if it can, and here it's in soil. This part of my parking strip is now in soil, and I feel like if I can get its roots down, then I'm hoping it will take. Yeah, because the pollen, I do like it, but it's such a great pollinator tree. And I have power lines along here. Oh, that's the other thing. And so Cascara is a good plant or good tree that is on street planting list because it only tops out at about 30 feet. And so that's why I also picked it, is it can grow underneath power lines. Thank you. All right. And so this is another patch. It looks like a total mess right now to some people, but to me, I'm like, ooh, it looks exciting. This big mound, I wanted to left this here because this is what a mole does, right? But if you have a garden, you just can go like this. Whereas if you have grass growing, you're like, oh, why is there a big hole in the grass? Now I have to do something about it. And here it's just like, okay, I'll just tamp that molehill back down, and my work is done. And this big patch of little seed, sprouts, that is sea blush. So in another couple weeks, this will be a sea of pink that's growing. It's another wildflower that you frequently find out at Washington Park. It's an annual that it will die back completely, and it just reseeds. And I don't do anything to this. In summertime, it will turn brown. And then the key to this is I just leave the soil. So people are talking about maintenance. All I do is if there's a really obnoxious weed like dandelions have gotten in there, I pick them out, because once you start an ecosystem like this, you don't want to be like hoeing the soil, because you've got living seeds that are taking root and established here, which is what you want. You get to just leave it be, right? So I've got sea blush here, and then I have a few, you probably can't see, there's a few bulbs that are just starting to pop up. Those are great camas that are in there, which I'm super excited about. And then the last island is on the corner, this is another annual that reseeds itself. Basically, you have seed packets growing in your yard, right? If I wanted to put this flower somewhere else, I could just take some of my plant, walk it over here, or just, right, and dust it off, and I would have more. But I'm trying to do I'm going to do an island here, right? This is a plant I just got last spring from our plant sale, and it exceeded itself this much. So that's the caution, is if you don't want the seeds, you need to pick the seed heads, right? So similar with like the nodding onion. It now is full, right? But if you have nodding onion next to something else that you really like, you want to pull those seed heads off before letting them go if you don't want them to spread around. But I'm embracing that, because it can have this whole patch.
Which
right?
grass is that?
This is another oat grass. This one's an oat grass. I don't think this one's not a native grass. And I have some low-growing juniper that's not a native juniper. I just like I wanted to have some ground cover in there. Yeah.
Which picture, is that a phone pole or a?
That's a telephone pole.
Okay, good.
I was going to ask what kind of tree that was.
Yeah.
It wasn't done.
Yeah.
So it's still a tree.
Yeah.
You do have a picture of
The flower.
flower.
Yes, and so that will all bloom blue.
Oh, wow.
That's your giant blue-eyed Mary. So this will all be, blue in there. Which just makes me happy. It's now a plant I love. I didn't even know this plant, 4 or 5 years ago, and now I love it, right? And when I walk out in Washington Park right now, you can see the little blue-eyed berry, which are super tiny. They're just starting to bloom now. So this is where my garden is also a learning lab for me, right? So I'm getting to know the plants also and what their habits are for the ones that are growing out in the wild. And so my last slide is just...
One quick question on that
yeah,
slide.
oh, I forgot. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you can talk about Clark yet, but is that large woody debris in front of the telephone pole I see?
Oh, yeah, so... yeah, so this tree is a deodora cedar, and it just drops stuff. And so I mostly just leave all this stuff. I sweep it off the walk, and I just put it all, it's all in these garden beds, which is, I just leave woody debris. And
But the big chunk.
Yeah.
oh, this,
Yeah.
this is what, so we have one of our members' name is Jen, and Jen might call that a pig from space, which is, what is that random thing that is like landed in your yard? But I like tree art. I like, so this is just, this is a piece of wood I found that I like, that to me it has this sculptural element that I appreciate. So that's, yes, that is a random large piece of debris. But, it's rotting slowly at the bottom.
I was gonna say, lots of benefits of large woody debris.
Yes, it's rotting from the bottom, and there are so many mushrooms that grow in my yard. And if you don't think if you think mushrooms are unsightly, you can just pull them, but I really like having them there. And so this patch here is going to be Clarkia. It's just sprouted. It's like this big, called Farewell to Spring. And my funny story about this was, when I was making this presentation, I actually wanted to say, I don't know that I've ever seen this out in the wild. I also I learned about from our plant sale. I was like, I don't know if I've seen this out in the wild. So I went to iNaturalist. If you don't know about iNaturalist, come talk to any of us with a chapter. This is a website and app that you can use to help identify a plant that you're looking at, or also to search a map for where you might find a plant. So that's what I did. I picked my region, like Anacortes area, show me this plant. And there it was at my house. Somebody had used iNaturalist and took a picture of my plant last week. That was the funniest thing. So somebody walking down the road was like, oh, what is that? I've never seen that. And they took a picture and they uploaded it to iNaturalist to identify it, and it was my plant. So there are some populations that may be somebody's garden, I don't know, like out on the peninsula. But this is a seed you can get like from Northwest Meadowscapes, and I know they don't just sell plants that are like immediate to our region, right? Some of them are broader. So anyway, I just thought that was hilarious.
Western Washington.
Western Washington for...
I mean, Clarkia.
For Clarkia, yeah. Northwest Meadowscapes does also, Eastern Washington. So the last photo, I just wanted to share.
Sarah, one point is that this is why it's really good if you're out in different areas to take pictures of plants growing naturally, because nobody knows that they're growing out there.
Right.
There are so many people that are posting pictures or plants at Washington Park.
Yeah.
All over the place, but there are lots of places where people aren't taking pictures and putting up on iNaturalist. So I encourage people to really help us all by taking pictures and posting.
Right, so I know Margie's been she's taken that on. So I benefit from somebody else doing that identification and putting it up on something like iNaturalist. So it is a community-based resource. And so I should do a little lifting and take some more pictures. I forgot, I have a few more slides. These are other species that grow in those garden beds in the front. So all of these handle really hot, dry areas. I will mention that this species ended up in Mark Turner's Weeds of the Northwest book, which I have a little bit of a beef about.
Yeah.
So any plant you could consider a quote-unquote weed, right, if it's not in the place that you want it to be. This is a workhorse of a plant, both culturally and in our region.
And for pollinators.
And for pollinators. So if you don't want it in your yard, just pull it out, right? But, and I don't find it's not like Pearly Everlasting, which will just rhizomatously grow really wide. It will reseed, but you can just pull it out. So anyway, I have yarrow. You see it out in meadows and on the bulbs. Really helpful plant. Oregon sunshine, which blooms bright yellow. see it at Deception Pass, this showy daisy. This is different than like an aster. You know, the aster is really spread wide, but the Origeron does well. I have those, and then I have another slide that shows some of the fall blooming ones. So I have Puget Sound gumweed in that first garden, and then you saw the little silver tips of the pearly everlasting coming up. And these are great for later summer and fall pollinators to come through. And so now when I go out to my garden, it's like, oh, what do I love? Like in a few weeks, I'll see this patch. And I was so delighted. This is the Cerastium with some sea blush. And out of a whole packet of this Lomatium nudicoli, I had one pop up, and I love it. I just love it. It has so much beautiful architectural structure. And this, you know, we don't see this one around here. We see the little Spring Beauty, not Spring Beauty, Spring Gold. Spring Gold, the Lomatium utriculatum. Yeah, little Spring Gold. But anyway, so I love, this is the meadow that will be in my front garden, you know, in a few weeks. And then anywhere that you do not sure what to plant, I have a friend that says, when in doubt, plant a sedum. Also workhorse of a plant. You can just put it anywhere and it will go. The broadleaf stonecrop, and it makes a beautiful little yellow flower. Yeah.
Are those also fall, or when, or did you just?
These here, the sedums?
Well, and the biscuit root.
Oh, the biscuit root. It blooms in the spring. Yeah, I started with a packet of seeds from Northwest Meadowscapes. I would suggest trying to find potted plants. It seemed to be or maybe starting it in a pot and then putting it in the ground. I just had a difficult time getting it started. But I did start the little Lomatium utriculatum, and I have about 6 of those from seed that started. Because the risk, right, when you sprinkle seeds on the ground, they're already adapted to be right there, so that's a great benefit, right? You don't have to risk moving it, but the drawback is, you know, with wind, the seed can get blown away. With a torrential rain pour, it can get washed away. When the dogs come through, like they're digging and raging, who knows where the seeds will end up. Birds, yeah, we can feed the birds with the seeds, or they take them. So yeah, we can do a whole thing on seed planting another time. But yeah, so that's a tour down my parking strip, which is now a beautiful, like, it's a community, right? It's a community of plants and animals, including us human animals.
And your neighbors get to enjoy it.
They do, yeah.
People are admiring.
So when you start with some plants, like you say you got from the sale,
Yeah,
how many would you put out?
that's a good question. So I usually buy in 3s because one just may not survive. It's my odds of getting at least one to start. And then it depends. If it's a plant that I can then, I'm hoping it will propagate, as long as 2 have survived, it's like, okay, I'm gonna get seeds that will then spread around. If it's totally different mentality, if I'm doing like shrub, you know, something bigger like shrubs, you know, then it's a, you know, so the ocean spray, I have 2 planted, and then the Pacific wax myrtle, I have 2 planted. One of my fails was I planted a shore pine, actually where the cascara is. I wanted to do a shore pine there, and the deer, I had not protected it then. I did not have wire fence around it. And the bucks in the fall, you know, it wasn't nibbling, it was like full on scraped the tree, so like half the tree was gone, and it was like, so that would be another great one to put on the parking strip. Yeah. Yes?
Do you do any supplemental watering besides watering for getting plants established? So after you've established your, you know, because you are obviously taking care of them for the first few years, but after that, are you doing any sort of summer watering?
I'm kind of just there, so
Okay.
I'm like in year 4.
Okay.
So but a lot of these plants have only just gone in, like in the last couple of years. These annuals, you don't need to do anything for, because they're going to take their season and then be done, right? You just be watering their brown stems. All these other plants, you'll see them out at Washington Park, they just go brown, right? They go dormant. right? They're not dead, they're just going dormant. The yarrow, it goes dormant. So I'm watering the shrubs. This year I'll water my shrubs, and then I'm hopefully gonna taper off. If we have a heat dome, I'll be pouring a lot of water on it.
When there is a heat dome, when are you
When
doing
there's
it?
a heat dome.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is important.
All right, so with a totally different kind of environment and home, Virginia's gonna walk us through her property.
So my slides are not as exotic and fancy as these two. I just set pictures and she put it all together, so I have no idea what's going to come up on the screen.
Do you want me to do them for you?
Put something up.
Yes, I will put them up there.
Yeah, just put something up. And okay, so I'll give you a little backstory on my property first. I have about 3 acres, which is primarily horse pasture. But right around the house on the west side is mature woods that was there when I moved in. So there were mature Doug fir, cedar, and alders, and some young alders that grew up. And I left them. I a little bit regret leaving them because now I've got a lot more shade than I did to start with. So they really took over a lot of the sun. And then on the whole north side is along my property line are my neighbors' cedar trees, which they ran a whole line of cedar trees, which have grown out about 10 feet over my fence line, which is really not the best thing because it's trashed most of my fence, but the birds love it, and so I need the trees. The trees are wonderful. So when I moved there was virtually nothing there. It was just the place had been put on pasture. So there were a little planting strip with a couple apple trees and a couple salmonberry and red elderberry, and that was about it, besides the big trees. So I started because it's a really windy spot, it's on a slope, it's got terrible soil, rocky, clay, no drainage, it's on a slope, and it got some sun, but then it got a lot of shade in the afternoon from the big trees. And so it was kind of a challenge, what I was going to do with it all, but I knew the primary thing was to create some privacy and natural habitat for the wildlife, especially birds. I wanted to encourage lots of birds. And at the time when I moved in, which was 33 years ago, there weren't really any deer around, and I'm surrounded by acres and acres and acres of open fields, forested area, plenty of room for the deer. But they all decided my yard was their favorite place. So my little patch of woods was where they wanted to come. So I put a 4-foot fence around it. Then I put a 7-foot fence around it. And in the last couple of years, I've had so many babies born that the mom decided this was the perfect place to raise these young children. And so they came and they have been devouring my yard. So finally last year, I bit the bullet and I incorporated 8-foot fencing all the way around my whole upper area around the house, which was a lot of fencing. But the deer are not coming in anymore. So I have had to.
Where do you live?
North Stanwood area, around Lake Ketchum. So the deer are now staying away finally, but I had to give up on low growing plants altogether. I never grew annuals pretty much, it was just always perennials, and I tried to stick with all native plants. I did the researching the same way that Sarah did, but the first things I planted were my 2 coast redwood trees that I brought up from California because I have a love affair with coast redwoods. So I planted 2, one was about 2 feet tall and one was about 9 inches, just a seedling. And I planted them about 20 feet apart because redwoods need to be close together. And I planted them right on the edge of my property line on the west side where the edge of the forested part is. And those trees now it was really interesting watching them grow. They look very different. There will be a picture of them here, but they're now, I stood back and looked yesterday, and the one that was 9 inches tall is now almost topping out over the mature Doug firs that have to be, close to 70, 80, 100 years old because they were mature when I moved in. And the other redwood is built out more in trunk size, so it's a little bit shorter, but it's fatter. And they're really different, but there'll be a picture of them. But mostly I focused on shrubbery. So I wanted evergreen shrubbery and I wanted deciduous. I wanted berries So I planted a lot of flowering currant for the hummingbirds. I planted so many berry plants, snowberry, thimbleberry, salmonberry, blue elderberry, all those native plants, mock orange, and I did numbers of a lot of those things. So I spread them around the yard. So I got like about 8 or 9 red currant plants and about 4 or 5 mock orange spread around in different areas. And the rest of the berry plants are kind of in a thicket, which is by the house, which you'll see a picture of that. This is some of the red currant here, and you can see, and mixed in with this is kind of just a mishmash. The redwood trees are in the background there, and this mishmash is springtime, but except for the blooming, it looks pretty much the same in the wintertime, and it's a mix of the red currant is growing in amongst the mock orange and salmonberry, and they're all just kind of mushing in together there, and the birds absolutely love it. The birds have just flourished there. I've got so many varieties of birds. The hawks come in, the eagles come in, and it's just wonderful. And they forage year-round.
For those shrubs, do you remember about how far apart you put them in initially, the mock orange and the?
Close. They were pretty
couple
close
feet?
together, just a couple feet, yeah. And they were all just, sprouts when I put them in. So they just grown up, and I just let them go. I rarely prune them. I did initially because it was a little too thick, so I thinned it out a little bit. But lately, it's kind of just grown into a big woodsy patch. And there's a little apple tree to the left in that one. And this other picture, the big shrub is a California wax myrtle, which I absolutely love. And the birds go nuts for this bush. And it's, I do nothing. I've never watered it. It just grows. It was about 15 feet high and about 10 feet wide now. It's along my deck. And the flickers go there. It used to come in the springtime or the fall when the spring gets the green seeds, and then by the fall the seeds turn brown and there's little tiny seeds and just tons and tons of seeds. And the birds ignored it for the first couple of years. They didn't do much with it. But then they sort of discovered it, and now when the seeds are out, it's full, the shrub is full of flickers and juncos and finches and towhees, and they just go, there's not a seed that hits the ground because they are all over it eating all these seeds.
What's the difference between a California and a Pacific?
It's just
It's the same
common
thing.
names. That's the problem with common names, yeah.
Yeah, it was originally California wax myrtle, and then I think they changed it to Pacific.
Okay.
But it's Miraca, California.
Yeah.
But it's so drought resistant, you don't need to do anything to it, but you can prune it heavily if you want to, and it just keeps growing.
Any problem with disease with that? I noticed when I
Never.
went to a store, it looked like the leaves were.
The leaves do drop off. So it is an evergreen shrub, but tree sized kind of. But the leaves do drop off. But not completely. You just get, leaf drop.
When we had the.
It's a messy plant.
Broadleaf evergreen would,
Okay.
I mean, it replaces its leaves.
It does.
It's just not all at one time.
Right. It's a messy plant, I have to say, but the birds absolutely go nuts for it. The deer don't bother at all. That's one plant they didn't.
Although I will say, they do in some.
Yeah.
So I had a real problem with deer.
Yeah, they've never bothered that one, but they've bothered a lot of the other plants, like the red currant that they supposedly don't eat.
Right.
So it's been a struggle. So whatever the next one is. So these are the redwood trees. So this is one, and this is the young one, I call it, and this is the older one. And the bark is so completely different. So in this one, it's very reddish, and you can see how raggedy it is. And this one is more like a sequoia, so it's a darker brown, and it's very solid trunk. But the interesting thing, and the foliage is, the leaves are just a slightly different color. This one's more blue-green, and this one's a little more green. And there's a rhododendron growing up in here as well. But the interesting thing about this one is the squirrels, the Douglas squirrel, loved loves that tree. And I kept noticing all this bark coming off of it. And I thought, what was going on? And finally I found the squirrel one day was stripping the bark off the redwood tree and carrying off big long strips of bark going up to some other grove of trees that I had and making a little mess somewhere. So the squirrels just love hopping from the tree to the tree. The birds love the tree. They're messy trees too, but they're growing really well, and they're about 20 feet apart, so their roots can intertwine, and they're thriving. Except for when they were just little seedlings, I never have watered them or done anything. Trim branches, nothing. So they're just growing there. And this is on the west edge of my wooded area. And this is just a kind of a bad close-up of a red huckleberry that's in bloom right now. I have a lot of red huckleberry plants around that planted a couple which didn't do well. So I just gave up on trying to plant them, and they just are naturalizing themselves around the wooded area. So there's probably about 10 red huckleberries now.
Red huckleberry needs decaying wood to grow on.
Yeah.
Again, large woody debris, but that certainly if you buried some dead wood and made some chips.
I tried
would
that
help
and
out.
it still didn't work. But
They're tough.
They're hard to transplant, I have to say, and get started. So I just let them, fortunately, they just find their own place to start up, and so I'm surrounded by a nice little grove of red huckleberries, which are so wonderful to eat. And the birds really actually don't eat that many of them, I'm surprised. But they seem to like other stuff better. This is probably my absolute favorite plant, and this is a western azalea, or rhododendron occidentalis. And I have about 4 of those. This one is the best one. It's got a real raspberry tone to it, and the others are slightly paler, and this one is so fragrant. So I have about 4 of those planted around, and one I put in a pot just to see how it would do, and it's actually doing really well. I was surprised. So it's a big, huge pot, but in the first year, it bloomed the second year, which is the first. I mean, the other plants never did that. They took about 3 or 4 years before they actually bloomed. So if you can run across one of these, they're very, very hard to find. But if you can,
We might want to take cuttings.
well, I'm trying to figure out how to do that the best. But yeah, I want to try to propagate it.
Because that one in the picture, how old is that?
So that is about 30 years old. So it's about 8 feet tall now, and it's about 4 feet wide. And it's in a it's just about that kind of thing. It gets sun in the to about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it's shaded. And it gets a little morning, in the wintertime it doesn't get as much sun because the sun doesn't get high enough to get over the trees, so to the south. So, but it just thrives. It's just, and it's right next to my porch, my deck. So I walk down the stairs and I get to breathe that in every time when it's blooming.
And that's a deciduous rhododendron, it's just so
it is.
People, the deciduous rhododendrons are the fragrant ones.
Yeah.
That's what's really special.
And this one was taken, I had a friend who had a rhododendron nursery, and so that's where I got all these from. And she had a person who would go out into the wilds and collect specimens and start them, and that's where this came from. So this one actually was started from a wild cloud. So, and this is okay. So this is a cedar tree, obviously, on my driveway with low Salal.
Oregon grape.
Oregon grape. I mean, yeah, low Salal. Low Oregon grape. And I put a couple plants there, and it's taken a long time because it's a really shady spot. But they have spread and spread and spread, and doing really well there. And that's a sword fern, obviously. I planted 2 red currants there. You can't see them, but there's one on the left side of it, and there's one on the right side of it, and there's osier dogwood back behind it. It's a silver maple, which is not a native tree, but it was there when I moved in, and it's actually a very nice tree. And I did have an arborist come and take some of the big limbs off because it was getting a little out of control.
Is there twinberry in the lower right corner?
No, that's osier.
On the ground, like the low, in the snow.
Oh, that's just leaves.
Oh, it's leaves, okay.
Yeah, it's just dead leaf. I leave all the
Yeah.
dead leaf debris. I do not, I rake up a little bit of it just in areas where I need to be able to walk through a little bit better. But I leave almost all the leaf debris. I leave all the tree debris. I have tons of tree debris from the cedars and the alders and the redwood tree. I mean, they all dump a lot of debris, and I just leave it all on the ground. I clean up very little of it, and I make little wood piles up in the woods for the critters up there. And it's kind of an open, the woods has really changed because over the years all the lower branches have, gone, and the cedars have opened up a lot more, so it's a lot more open. So I just planted some osoberry and I'm going to try some blue elderberry in there because it's so more open now than it used to be, to see if they'll grow. And now that the deer are out of there, because everything else I planted there except for the tall Oregon grape, which has done really well. It's growing very slowly, but it's doing really well, even though it doesn't get a lot of sun, direct sun. It's got enough light now that it's doing really well, but the deer got in there and they just, everything I put in there, they just trashed. So until, we'll see how it goes now that they're out of there. We'll see how that goes. Yeah. So this is along the edge of my driveway, and it's Salal, that is Salal. And then there is a red currant here and a red huckleberry that just has grown up behind that on a big old stump. Yeah. And there's a fir tree, a Doug fir, right next to that. So, and there's two red currants. There's one here and there's one on the other side, which is not in the picture. But I took this because I wanted to show you this is what it looks like in the wintertime, obviously. But the Salal just has grown up. When it started, I planted about 3 plants, I think. It grew very, very, very slowly. It just took so long to get going. I thought it would never get going. And then finally, it just kind of exploded, and it grows up, and it's growing up about 10 feet high, climbed up over the stump, and it just grew up into the wooded area behind the huckleberry there, and it's just all kind of a big
Did you
function.
plant it right into your pasture?
No, this is all along the wooded area at the top.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things
So
I really
you
had to
just-
be careful of planting, I've only planted pretty much perennials, but I had to be really careful about the things that I planted that wouldn't get spread out into the pasture, because I didn't want things getting introduced out into the pasture. So
You keep horses.
because I have horses. And so I needed to be really careful about putting plants out that wouldn't theoretically, want to go spread around. The red elderberry is actually the worst because the birds spread those berries all over and it pops up all over the place. And
You bring them into us.
I bring them into
So what was there?
Yeah.
So what was there that you planted in it when you said at the wooded area? Was there anything there under
Just
the
trees.
trees?
Nope.
Okay, so you put them just in the ground under the trees. Okay.
Understory.
Yeah, in the understory. Okay. And this has been a really tough spot. So this is the 2 Doug firs were there, and then the redwood tree is the reddish one towards the back, and then there's another redwood tree back there, and that's my chain link that's right along my edge of my driveway for the deer. But this is a evergreen huckleberry, which I planted a lot of evergreen huckleberry, so I have about 4 evergreen huckleberry plants too. Some are just you'll see it, there's a picture, there's a picture there. But these Oregon grape have been so slow to grow. They've been there at least 10 years. And they're just so slow, and I just don't know. And part of it is the soil. They don't like the Doug fir. I don't know exactly what it is. It's a combination of things. But finally, about a year ago, they started taking off. And they're actually, this one has been blooming now, which was the first time last year. And this is a Nootka rose here. And this evergreen huckleberry has stayed this size for like 6 years. It has not grown, and I don't know if it will ever grow. The rabbits took it out. I had that little cage around it still for the bunny rabbits, but it just has never done very much. So it's just a bad spot. It's not a lot of deep earth there. It's very hard packed, and the roots from the Doug fir, I think they just don't agree very well. But it's, you know, hanging in there, and they're doing okay, so we'll see where they go. And on this picture, there's sword fern there, a madrone that I planted in the background. This is the biggest evergreen huckleberry, which is about 8 feet tall and about 3 feet wide now. And behind that is another one of the oxygen tally, which you can't see. And this I tried, this is on a stump, so it's an old tree stump, an old cedar tree stump underneath here. And so I tried kinnikinnick about 5 times, and it would not grow. I tried adding more soil, I tried not soil, I tried this, I tried that. It got plenty of sunshine at that time, just would not survive. And a friend had given me some lingonberry, so I had a little clump of lingonberry about like this, and I planted it right there, and then it just suddenly just went, and it just took off and went all over. And it's actually fine because it's not invasive. The birds really like it. It blooms similar to the kinnikinnick. It's not a native plant, alas, but
How old is the evergreen huckleberry?
the evergreen huckleberry is about 25 years old.
Oh, same as our garden then, the ones in the demonstration garden.
How old is your madrone?
The madrone is about 20 years old. And it was very slow. It was like this big when I planted it. I had tried about 5 madrone seedlings that I dug up from roadside areas that were in like parking strips, and you know, they do not transplant well. So I finally gave up, and when the conservation district started selling madrone seedlings, I got one of the first year the Snohomish County one did it. They had 5 for sale, and I bought 2, and I gave one to a friend. And hers has done really well too. But it was a slow start. It's not that big. It's probably about 15 feet high. No, it must be about 20 feet high, actually. And the trunk kind of goes out and like this. It's not in the best location. It doesn't get as much sun as it probably would like, but it's hanging in there, so we'll see what happens.
And how close is that to Douglas fir?
Not at all. It's not,
I just noticed that a lot of times where I see them growing well.
True, they're usually up against other trees.
Well, they're near
Yeah,
the Doug
yeah.
fir, and
It's not, it was out in the open pretty much. 'Cause
did
it
the
was
deer
this-
bother it before your
No.
fence?
No, the deer never bothered the evergreen huckleberry or the madrone. Most of the trees they leave
Coopville
alone.
deer would have.
Well,
Because that's what they did to mine.
They've eaten my food.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are all arborized by deer.
Yeah.
Whatever. Oh, and this is does anybody recognize this plant?
Louisia.
Louisia.
Yeah, do you know which one this is?
Caroline?
Tweedia.
So where is this? Is it outside, like on your porch?
It was outside. I put it on a plant. I put it in a pot. I knew it was not going to survive. I have really wet, poorly draining soil, so it's really difficult to grow things.
Just so people know, I mean, it's in Eastern Washington.
It is an
dry
Eastern Washington plant, and
Doesn't like
but
our wet
it is
soil.
like one of my favorite plants. And so I found some at the Central Sale a lot of years ago. And so I bought 3, 2 survived. This was the last one that I had. This one it only lasted about 3 years. And then it got really cold one winter and snow, and even though I had a little cover over it, and I babied it, and it was just in a gravel pot, but it did really, really well, and then it succumbed. It got that root disease, and it just rotted.
Planta's Nativa has it.
Pardon?
Yeah, Planta's Nativa sells it sometimes.
But I can never find them. They're already sold out by the time I ever get to them. But if you come across one and you put it in the right environment, boy, it's a treasure to have. It is such a gorgeous plant. It's so gorgeous.
And when does it bloom? When is it blooming?
I think early summer, I think is when it blooms, I'm trying to remember. So mostly my perennial plants that I've done have not done that great because of rabbits and the deer. And so everything I planted, I just I got so frustrated, I just gave up. So now that I've got the deer fenced out, and bunnies have seemed to have disappeared, the owls have gotten the last of the rabbits, I think. So I'm going to try starting over again with more. The lupin have done well, and the camas, I had great camas, and that's sort of not getting enough sun, I think, or it's too wet, I'm not sure. And the penstemons, most of those have done okay, but it's gotten so wet a lot that without good drainage, even those are suffering a lot. So I'm just sort of sticking more or less to shrubs because it seems to be the easiest thing and the lowest maintenance. So low maintenance is key, and I don't prune a whole lot, so I just sort of leave it for the birds to enjoy. And they are great at going in there and picking out branches that they like off different of the berry bushes and stuff. You can watch them selecting, which is the best branch to get. No, I don't like that one, I want this one, so the birds I have tons and tons of birds, which is, what I was striving for, so.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing
Okay.
this, Sarah and Linda. Do you have any more questions? If not, I have just one little bit of propaganda. I grew up in Nebraska, and in 2005, NASA scientists used satellite imagery to discover that lawns, including commercial lawns, golf courses, playgrounds, cemeteries, are the single largest irrigated crop in America by surface area. And so that's about 50,000 square miles of lawn. It's about 3 times the area taken up by corn. So either take out your lawn and put in native plants or plant corn. Now, this is
We're going to do like a quick transition. Did you have one more quick?
I just had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
In the native plant garden, how do you keep the paths clean if they're gravel now?
Leaf blower.
Okay.
Yep.
How do you start camas bulbs? I heard, let me just mention this, that somebody had the best luck when she put a bunch of them, and I have some very tiny ones, in one pot the first year, and then
even more than a year, right? Several years, because they first bloomed just like a little blade of grass, right? And camas bulb, and the next year,
We've learned the best way to propagate camas bulbs is to let nature do it. So we were trying to grow them from seed, which you can do very easily. They do sprout from seed, but they're a pain in the neck to transplant into individual pots. And so it was much better to find an area that you designate in your yard and sprinkle a bunch of seeds there. I was just transplanting some yesterday. They drill their bulbs down deep, so I was trying to dig out some bulbs to just put, it's a bad time of year to move bulbs, I know, but I was just trying to start them in new places, and every shovelful I was like breaking
another
off the
one.
bulbs. I was just so mad. But the thing is, they go to seed, they spread readily, so I have, patches like this that are just solid camas, and
You're letting them go to seed.
but then you can't disturb the soil. Like what I said about letting the, even annual seeding, if you were to hoe the soil or you are scratching a lot at the surface, then you're destroying all those first year little.
They do look like little blades of grass, so it's really easy to accidentally weed them thinking it's grass.
But like the patch of camas that's in the front parking strip area at the demonstration garden, we dug down there. We just, like potatoes, you just separate the bulbs and then you move them because they're creating new bulbs themselves. In addition to reseeding, they're creating bulbs, right? So that's
But your idea about, I do have a pot at home where I put camas seeds, and I just leave that pot for a couple of years, and they're sprouting right now, and I'm like, oh, are they big enough to move yet or not? But it makes it easy to move without damaging the bulb, so.
because the bulb inside is so tiny until you get to 3 to 5 years.
I'm happy to give
down
people
the line.
camas seeds because I really don't want to try growing
From
them
seed.
from seed for our purposes.
So why don't we do just like a couple minute stretch?
Yes, Lauren's actually
We're
gonna
all taking our
start-
seats.
Well, Lauren, are you gonna do a presentation and then go to the garage, or?
Yeah, since we're all in here first, I'm just gonna go over a couple little things on the analog whiteboard here. I'll try to keep it short just because I can certainly ramble on about trees for days. So we'll just start out here, and then anybody that wants to join out in the garage, I have some more kind of hands-on examples of what some of the, one of the things that I like to incentivize and prioritize when it comes to planting trees. Similar to Bob, quick PSA, plant more tall trees. All these little perennials are great, but I like to think that most of us here, the reason that we're really into working with native plants is for the ecological services that they provide, and nothing provides more ecological services per square foot or per whatever than big full-size trees. And so plant the biggest plants that you can that your space will allow. One thing that we didn't talk about yet here, but I'm sure is on this amazing list of resources that Nan put out, is sourcing your native plants. And obviously, you know, the Salal chapter here has a great native plant sale. So I'm not going to go through all those specifics, but these are all some of the different types or forms that the native plants that we get can come in, and all of them can have their own little nuances to get them properly established. Anybody not familiar with any of these guys?
What's B&B?
Bald and burlap. There you go. So I don't have examples of all of them that we're going to be showing you there, but my favorite, absolute favorite, live stakes. They're free. Once you get your plant started and established, then you can have as many of that plant as you want moving forward. Plugs and bare roots are generally ones that you'll get from your local conservation districts, the Plant Material Center in Bow, what have you. They're a great kind of low investment way to start with plants because they're dang cheap. And then that way you can just plant a ton of them, not invest a ton of time and energy into really establishing each little one, and then whatever thrives, thrives, and then you can edit from there. What generally, you know, residential gardeners are going to work with most are going to be your potted and your balled and burlap. And so I'm going to show you examples once we get to the garage of live staking, potted, and balled and burlap I didn't bring an example of, and so we're going to kind of go through that right now. And again, little preamble, I'm a tree guy, and so I'm talking specifically about planting trees, woody shrubs, and plants. I'm not going to cover planting small perennials, bulbs, seeds, and stuff like that. Honestly, that's a bit of a gap in my knowledge. And so I'm sure Sarah and the other folks here would have, you know, all the answers to your questions that you need. All right. So, awesome presentations. So cool seeing the examples of what people have done. And I think that really is one of the most important things when we're thinking about our landscapes is knowing what plants want to be in their native areas, and then letting them be that, even if it's in our own little urban pockets and squares. And so one of the things that I thought was most important, and I always want to stress, is conservation of material on site. Plants that are messy are not doing you a disservice, they're helping you out, because everything that those plants drop, they're doing it for a reason, they're feeding themselves, they're feeding the community around them, and it's all the best quality mulch for that particular plant. So it's the most backwards thing in the world to rake up leaves, pay someone to haul them away, and then pay someone to haul in mulch that's not as good. So embrace the messiness. The messier that our landscapes are, the better they're doing for everyone. Also, disclaimer, we have lots of different native little environments and microenvironments here in Washington. My favorite is our native conifer forest. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to be kind of pushing. But again, you know, so everything that I say here won't necessarily, you know, apply if you're talking about doing a very arid desert kind of type of planting or what have you. The other biggest thing that a lot of folks brought up in their thing is that soils are going to be generally your biggest limiting factor and the hardest thing for us to work to remedy. And really, there's no solution for that but time and certain little practices that we can do. But when it comes to planting trees and shrubs, what goes on underneath the soil, or when it comes to both planting and then growing and establishing and living with happy, healthy trees and shrubs, what goes on underneath the soil is as important, if not more important than what goes on above the soil. And so when it comes to planting, we want to work with the root ball and work with the tree underneath the soil to really get it set up happy and healthy so that you get it planted, right tree, right place. Ideally, you don't have to do a single thing to it again. If we're talking about bald and burlap trees, most of them are field grown. So they're grown in the field, kind of industrial, agricultural style, and they're all going to be planted and grown, hopefully, at the right height. What happens though then, so there's our happy tree trunk flare, trunk. We can get into a lot of specific physiological about it if anybody's interested in that. But what happens a lot of times is they're grown in the field and then they're harvested with machinery. So the machinery comes in, digs out that ball and burlap, and in the process of doing it, it pushes that clay soil level up here. Proper planting height and planting trees too deep is the single worst thing that you can do for your trees, and one of the things that people aren't necessarily aware of. Trees and woody shrubs are not tomato plants. If you plant it 8 inches deep, it's not going to send out more roots and make a happier, healthier tree. What it's going to do is this transition zone between the roots and the stem of the tree is a very incredibly important physiological part of the tree that operates in gas exchange and all types of things. And if we bury that, you're essentially suffocating and choking off the tree. So anytime you then get your nice tree from the nursery in a ball and burlap here, covered up in burlap and what have you, first thing you want to do is immediately excavate down into that burlap, take away all that stuff, and find that trunk flare. That transition zone from the trunk down to the roots, that's exactly where you want the tree to be planted height-wise. Oftentimes, if we're starting with smaller trees, you might not be able to find the trunk flare because it hasn't really developed that yet, or certain species it doesn't show as much. So then you can look for that topmost structural root, and that you can assume is going to be the proper planting height. So after excavating down to that trunk flare, we also want to look for other kind of defects, for lack of a better word, in the root ball area that's going to cause problems moving forward. Most importantly, we want to look for kinked or circling roots. If a root, generally this happens more in pot-grown plants or plants that haven't been, properly potted up as, nursery standards indicate that they should, or ones that are pot-bound, is we got our pot here, we got our beautiful little tree in the middle that's grown too big for the pot and needs to go, and so the roots are growing out, hits the side of that container, and then hangs right and starts working its way around. Eventually, if we don't go out and excavate and cut that root before it starts girdling or before it starts circling, eventually the caliper of that tree is going to grow out to be like this, and that root will literally suffocate the tree. Create a tourniquet, cut off the cambium on that section there, and you'll see your tree incredibly decline. The hard thing about that is usually that doesn't show up for 5 years maybe, 15 years maybe. There's a spectacular heritage birch tree on the SVC campus that's just starting to show signs of root decay. It's probably almost an 100-year-old tree, but only now are those circling roots starting to impact it. So that's where planting is our opportunity to address these problems beforehand. So don't be afraid to get in there and do some root pruning. Pruning back side roots will stimulate growth, and so it'll help it out, just start pushing stuff out. But also any of those defects, if we don't address them, they're still gonna be there, and eventually it's gonna probably kill your tree, which we don't want.
You might show this when we go out there, but wait, before you do that, if that root was circling around and you pulled the whole thing out of the pot, how deep and where would you cut that to prevent the continuation?
We will go over hopefully specific examples out there. I grabbed just a handful of plants from my own nursery garden, which are all volunteers or propagated plants that I threw in pots and then don't know where the heck I was going to plant them, but eventually they'll get planted and haven't been planted for years. So I'm guessing we're going to have some pretty root-bound ones in there that we'll have examples of. But generally, again, what goes on underneath the soil, similar to what goes on up above the soil, we want to be conscious and aware of how much root we're taking away.
Yeah.
And so that will certainly help You make your decisions. Also knowing your species is very important. I want everybody here to get in the dirt, work with your trees. Eventually, you should be able to identify what plant you're working on and what you run across just based on the roots. Because every tree has its own specific ID characteristics below ground in their roots, similar to what it does up above. And so when you're gardening along, you want to plant something right there, but you run across this one root, you should be able to tell, well, this root is coming from my black walnut tree here, or it's coming from the western red cedar just by looking at it there. And so getting in, working in those root balls is a really great way to familiarize yourself with those roots. The other important thing about trees or planting anything, proper planting height, and then also not creating stratification of layers within the soil when we're planting. We don't want to plant plants within pots within the dirt. And the way that we do that is by creating soft transitions between the different layers of soil. And so, for example, we're going to start out with ground here. We got our root ball here, or our pot. Generally, everybody knows kind of rule of thumb is you want your planting hole about 2 times the width of the root ball that you're going to plant there. And so, we'll just call that the planting hole there that we're going to dig out there. You want to make sure, again, if we're digging with a flat spade, that we're not making soft, or we're not making just sharp, smooth sides of the planting holes. You want to get in there, you can get your plant started, but then you want to loosen up that soil. And working with natural native soil is always going to be your best. And that's where, if you have crappy soil, that's kind of when you're in a bit of a pickle. Because if you have super crappy soil out here, and put really great soil in here, and then you don't create any kind of roughing up of the sides where the soils can naturally intermingle, then the tree's gonna think, hey, this is just a beautiful pot full of great soil. I'm gonna send out my roots here. Oh, that's crappy soil there. Then I'm gonna start working and girdling around inside the whole planting hole right there, which we don't want. So again, we got our nice soft hole dug here, and we've got our plant in here. My preferred planting technique is you get your nice hole dug here using either a handled cultivator or your hands. I do a lot of digging with my hands. Take some of this side dirt and knock it away. You're widening the hole at that process, and then all of that dirt is coming in and filling in down here. What we really want to avoid is having any air pockets around the roots of our trees here. And so I use a technique called mudding in, if anybody's heard of that before, where you start getting soil in there, you're gonna have some roots that are bare and exposed here, or the root ball fell apart as you're getting it into the hole. All good things. If you fill in with water and you turn this to mud, you can either use the jet setting on Nootka Rose, our elderberries, snowberry, basically any of our cane growing natives, all of the willows. If you catch it either in its dormancy or in the springtime, you just chop off some new growth, jam it in the dirt past 1 or 2 nodes, and you just planted yourself a new plant.
Really? Is that the stake?
Live staking.
Live stake.
Yep.
So you plant it in the ground or put it in a bucket for a while until it's got some roots?
I just jam it in the ground. Yep. Certainly you could, some of the willows, you could leave them in water and they'll root out in water, and then you can pot them up essentially, or essentially you have live bare root plants to work with at that point. But I say, again, it's low investment. Cut yourself 50 spirea stems, jam them all in the ground.
Just be sure figure out where you cut them from.
I say cut them from anywhere. I go to parks, I go all over, and again, obviously, it's at this point we're foraging material from native areas, and so we want to use the same foraging mindset that we do for harvesting mushrooms or any type of fruit, where you don't take more than a third. You take one for you leave one for someone else, you leave one for all the native critters.
As long as you're not digging it up, you're cutting it.
Exactly.
So how far above the ground are you cutting?
So these were all, I like to work with smaller stems that are probably about the last 2 years growth. But
So
for
not fresh growth for a while?
Yeah, you want to get into the woodier, but that's where each species is a little bit different. And so red osier dogwood, for example, I find that I have better success with live stake planting if I do cut into woodier growth. Why that is, I don't know specifically, but that's just from my experience. And then you want to, again, you know, what kind of soil you have is going to kind of indicate how easy it is for you to jam in the ground, but similar to planting that we talked about, you don't want all that airspace around it. You want it nice and solid in the ground there. And so if you can, just put it in without putting a hole in first and just work it slowly in to where you get past a couple nodes, great. Sometimes if you start with a big enough caliber, but yeah, really tough soil, you can use a piece of rebar or you could do something to make a hole first, get it in there and just use the heel of your foot to just compact that soil around it.
You don't scrape the stem at all?
I don't.
Oh.
Some
Does it matter if it's at a kind of an angle or?
angle might make it easier to push into the ground,
But it
but
doesn't
no.
make any difference for rooting?
Nope.
I plant after the beaver and it's got a nice, and
Exactly.
I just, oh, my dogwood, I just go pick up all his stuff and I plant it all back in the ground.
So let's just take a look at some plants here. You want to do a quick plant ID here? That one looks root bound.
Yeah.
All right. So again, in general, our hardwoods are going to have, especially if we're starting young, more small fibrous roots. And so you can get away, which means more root surface area, which means you can get away with doing heavier root pruning. Excuse me. Conifers are going to generally, it takes a little bit longer for them to develop those really fine roots, and we'll take a look at some of these side by side and hopefully be able to see something like that. But you just want to be a little more careful about how much roots you're cutting away, because again, if it's got just 3 main roots with a couple little side roots off of it, you prune one of those away, then that's 30 to 50% of the root mass right there, and we want to avoid that. So, heritage river birch. Actually, I'm not sure if it's a heritage, but it's a Betula nigra, river birch. Let's just take a look at this guy and see what we got going on in the pot. So, not too bad. Some very light girdlers there. Just circling guys, but nothing that I'd be too worried about. Again, we want to, and I just use my hands here as much as I can. Let's get rid of some weeds. And you just look for that topmost, with these small guys where you can't really see that trunk taper that well, you look for that topmost structural root. And I just found it about right there. So that right there is the level of planting that we want.
So you want that root, the topmost structural root to be buried or just at the surface?
Just exposed, and then when we put on our chip mulch to top it off, then you cover up that top little root and then it won't dry out. So again, with this one, we've got one, again, in the case of this tree, large diameter root, maybe 3/4 of a millimeter there, but it's a young guy, that hit the bottom of the pot and hung around there. And so you can either prune it out, or when they're flexible enough like this, you can just do this as part of your just loosening up of the soil. So again, one of my favorite tools, just a little 3-tine cultivator, or one of these dig it ducks. Also great for just getting in there, just loosening up. So this again, we're breaking down that barrier. And again, now we're running into some circling roots there. Look at those guys there. That hit the side of the pot right there. So you just want to, you can either try to just work them out and see what we got connected there, or if you find that you're just breaking apart your root ball more than you want to, just get in there with your soil specific pruners. You want to make sure that we're not using the same pruners that we prune trees with for cutting roots. And so I've got these fancy ones just because they're ones that I dropped. But you want to have your dirt tools. So I'm just going to prune off those guys. And in generally,
why is it used?
Is that for disease?
Yeah, exactly. The same reason we don't rub dirt onto cuts, just because we don't like the way that they look. A lot of pathogens are soil borne, and so we want to just keep those away from when we're making cuts on live tissue of trees.
Probably not good for your clippers either to be cut.
Also that, exactly. They're always going to be doling out, and so what I do is I use Silky brand tools. Good Japanese saws are great, and you swap out blades every pretty regularly, so you're still keeping your pruning tools nice and sharp. And then once one of them gets dulled, then I just turn that into my root pruning saw. And again, we're not going to be working on anything large enough here where we need to actually make some pruning cuts. But say, for example, you move on to a landscape and you find a tree, and as you're working around, oh, that's got a girdling root, and you feel good enough about cutting it, that's where maybe getting in with a saw and actually cutting that girdling root out now will really benefit your tree moving forward. So again, this guy's looking pretty good. Just all around, we just want to loosen this up. And again, that one I already cut. You don't got to yank it out. It's already cut. Just let it dangle. It's all good organic material for the ground. Before we actually plant some of these, let's take a look at some others and see what we want to do. Again, see, this one's been growing in here for a good little while, it looks like. So I'll just go through and just prune off all these guys down below just to make it easier for myself to get it out of the pot. And then let's see. There we go. So see how it's created that nice root mat down below there? Again, not ideal. So we're going to do what we can to just loosen that up and potentially prune away. Again, I'm still running into not a ton of like bigger caliber roots that I'm worried about too much, but we definitely want to loosen up this mat, and in the process of doing that, we may end up pruning away quite a bit of them. So, you know, you don't really have to baby trees that much. They're hardy, they can put up with a lot of stuff. As long as you're treating them with dignity and not just throwing them around, they can handle a lot of what we throw at it. And so you're doing it more of a disservice by babying it and trying to just like be like, I trust the nursery, it's perfect. I mean, I'm not saying nurseries are trying to do anything bad, but they got a lot of trees to worry about, and so they won't always be able to give that individual tree the care that you as the new cohabitant of the space with the tree will be able to. So again, with this one, none of these are big major ones that are really hitting the sides and girdling. So I'm more concerned about just loosening them up. And we did enough damage to this root ball where it's going to be exposed, and I'm going to get this one planted. So let me make a little bit of room here. I'll show you that planting technique, minus the water, just because I figured to make a little bit of a mess if we tried to run a hose in
So
here.
on that one, where are you finding the soil height or the bit?
Right up here.
Because of the
Topmost structural
topmost
roots.
structure.
Again,
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
only that big,
Right.
but you can tell there. And you can even start on these little guys, start to tell. And so this is a good example, I'll sweep up afterwards, of this looks like it was one that was plug grown, which I then potted up. Because do you see that up top there? Exactly, and so that's even grown in plugs. These are examples of kinked roots, where it hit the side of that plug and went down immediately. At this point, there's nothing I can do about that other than hope and trust that I root pruned it, or I addressed those issues as best as I could when I potted it up there, and just know that those roots are kind of then turning in okay and they're not going to cause an issue up top. So we're just going to pretend that this is our, ground soil layer. Again, one option is you dig down, make a hole, pot it in there. At this point, we start to have our hole there. I get out the hose or a bucket or what have you and really mud in that soil area around there. And then we slowly work our way up. And let's just say that what we end up, there's one of these crazy, things that always happens where you dig a hole to put something in the hole, and then you realize you don't have enough soil that came out of the hole to really properly plant it. I don't know how that works. That's just one of those magical things about the world. So again, took that out. Now it's nice and low here. So naturally, we want that soil all the way up to here. We could completely fill it up because it's in the pot here, or this is just an example of how in your landscape, if you find, you planted it too, a little too tall, but I already mudded it in and I don't want to yank that bad boy out and potentially damage the roots, just mound up that soil over it. So that's where. It'd be amazing if we had a nicer day and we could actually go out and just guerrilla plant a whole bunch of trees.
We could mud it out there,
You certainly could mud it out.
Yeah, there's lots of water.
Siphon it off. If you were doing that, would you be using topsoil?
Always using topsoil, exactly. The only reason that we got potting soil here is because we're putting it in pots. Yeah, but yes, topsoil always, and again, native soil, if you have it or if you can, is always in my mind going to be the best, because that's the soil that the tree's going to be growing in in the long term. So, gotta just mound this guy up a little bit more. Another thing that I didn't talk about in the thing, but is staking plants. In general, you want to stake for a reason. A lot of people think if you plant a new plant, you gotta stake it. And so the only reason to stake a tree is to protect it from vandalism, either by deer or by people. Say if you plant out on a parking strip and somebody runs into it on their electric skateboard or what have you. And then wind, obviously, especially if we're starting something taller. The nice thing about the mudding in technique and by root pruning or by loosening up the roots is generally you get it in there nice and solid enough that you don't really need any staking. But if you're worried at all about staking, we want to stake as low and as little as possible, because the way that trees know to put out roots or any growth by a tree is in response to a force that acts on it. And so if we're completely locking this guy in straight and the trunk there isn't feeling the forces of the wind because we're isolating it and all that force is going into the stake, then the roots don't know to put out roots in the directions that it needs to. So my favorite technique is you can either do triangle staking like that. My favorite technique is, again, pretend this is, say, 8 foot tall hemlock that we're planting, and this is one of those big 6 foot fence posts. Stake it at a diagonal as low as you can on the trunk, and then just a quick little tie with some kind of twine that'll break down in a year. Always use natural fibers. It's so easy for us just to move on and forget that we tied up a tree. And even if it's the stretchy stuff or anything that won't break down, it's so easy for us to forget. Next thing you know, you've girdled your tree. So, it's much better to have it use some either jute or natural twine that'll break down in a year. You come back and you realize, oh, this guy still, hasn't put out the growth that I wanted. Then you just tie it up again, but at least it gets you to go back and spend some more time with your trees. So, I would have mounded it up to where we got a nice spot. We would have staked it. And then, last step is you bed it in with arborist chips.
So by putting it at a diagonal, you're just stabilizing the very, very base of the trunk so the top part can sway
Top part can
around.
go like this. We're not worried about it uprooting itself in its planting hole. But then that top part can still sway and those forces can transfer down to that root crown that we talked about, and that'll tell the tree to put out the supporting roots in the direction that it needs to.
And you're also not in the root zone with the bottom of the stake.
Exactly. Again, so often, a lot of times plants will come from the nursery with a single stake. That just makes it easier for them to transport between grower to nursery to you, and so they don't get busted off in the trucks and stuff like that. That's not actually doing anything to support the tree because the root ball is out here, a stake is right there. If the root ball rotates, the stake rotates with it. And so that's where certainly staking diagonal, so you're getting out of that root zone, again, using natural materials, so that even if you forget to take the stake out and you find that your tree's grown around it, whatever, just break it off and let it grow around it.
And it doesn't need to be any longer than just past, a couple inches past the trunk, actually.
Exactly, yeah. And again, so if it were me, again, it'd be I'd get in with my pruners and cut that, or generally if we're using a larger diameter thing, I actually get out with my saw there and just cut it so that it's less noticeable too. And then, just bed in with, these are nice old arborist chips, and so they're already starting to break down and turn into good organic mulch. But again,
how do you secure that diagonal post in the ground?
in the ground,
Yeah.
just pound it in until it doesn't want to go. I use with these little guys, you don't need a lot, especially if you're.
Yeah, I'm thinking we
6 foot
we
ones.
planted a
Yeah.
20-foot Alaskan cedar. We had a hell of a time.
Yeah.
We have a lot of wind.
Yeah, well, that's
a lot of
hard starting with big trees. That's where I'd say patience and start with smaller stock is the best way to go about it. But if you're going to start with bigger trees, then this might not be the best staking method. At this point, then, we'll talk about securing posts in at a triangle and then anchoring it with some straps, which then likely aren't going to be, you're going to have to use something other than natural materials for it to be strong enough to hold it up. I do a lot of work for Mount Vernon Cemetery up off of Fir, and they just planted a ton of massive trees along that new Section 8. And they had a heck of a time with staking them because they insisted on starting big. Yeah, exactly. But again, you always want to make sure you're not cinching it up to the trunk. Tie yourself a nice loose bowline, that, or some kind of a strap that you can then tie it to. And again, even when you're doing it, you don't want to stake it. You want to stake it just tight enough where it's not going to fall over. But if you can give it a little bit of a give, then that'll just make it a stronger tree moving forward at that point.
Yeah, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
Yep, exactly.
So true.
Or at least the best time to plant a tree for you. So you can always think about, I'm planting this tree for somebody else. I plant this tree for the world that I want to be, not necessarily the world that I think is going to become.
I drive by a house I grew up on Allen Road, and we planted these trees like 1971 or 2, maybe 70. And I drove by the first time and went, whoa, I forgot how long ago that was, but
At least they kept them.
they kept those, yeah.
I did a too good job in my nursery, guys. I'm not running into any crazy roots. That's also the nice thing about starting with small stock, is that generally you don't run into that. So, I say patience.
And the trees actually grow a lot faster than you think sometimes, too, depending on the tree.
And especially here, even in the direction that our climate is going, we have an incredible growing climate. And so especially, when it comes to planning out your garden, whatever that plant tag says in terms of maximum size and spread, double it.
Yeah.
That's probably what it's going to turn into out here, which is good. Plant big things, plant density, let trees go together, let them be messy. The messier the majority of the work that I do is urban forestry, so working for private people in urban areas where just as a society we do a phenomenal job of destroying all the habitat on the ground level and on the mid-story. And so much of the habitat that is left to birds, to the beneficial bugs, to the beneficial fungi, to all the symbiotic, lichens and all that stuff exists up in the canopies of trees. And so if we can be okay with leaving deadwood in trees, if we can be okay with leaving density in trees, if we can be okay with leaving natural fractures and not going in and making a targeted clean pruning cut, which may, that individual tree will seal up and heal over, a little bit better, but you're costing complexity and you're costing microhabitat. And all of that stuff is very, very valuable for, for everybody. Cool. Does anybody have any other specific planting questions or would like to talk tools at all or techniques or anything like that?
What's the tool brand you said you like?
As far as pruning and cutting tools, I like Silky brand saws. Wesper up in Bellingham is going to have your biggest variety of them and the best prices. And they come everything from fixed blade to nice folders, everything ranging from $30 to like $150. And so you can get your nice range, but they're very good. But whatever tool you use, keep it sharp and keep it clean is more important. So good care. As far as pruners, always bypass pruners, not anvil pruners, meaning this upper blade bypasses that lower anvil. As opposed to dead ending on it. It will make a much higher quality cut. And again, keep your pruners clean, sharp, and lubed up. And the brand that I like is Okatsumi. That's what these guys are. But that being said, ARS makes good ones. Coronas are fine. I'm always a fan of ones that you can buy replacement parts for. Ways that we can just keep the objects in our life around and take care of them rather than just throwing them away and getting something new. That being said, if I drop this on the ground and I break the tip, I'm like, woo, another root pruning one. I do a lot of work, volunteer work fighting invasives here in our local parks. I operate a program called Little Mountain Weed Busters, where once a month we go and whack holly at Little Mountain Park. If anybody wants to join.
Yay, thank you.
Come
That's
join.
a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, it's awful. But that being said, I always lend out pruners to people, and so I have a lot of dirt pruning pruners out there.
It's a quick question on how do you dig them up? I have holly in my woods. You dig them up, or can I even just whacking them back do any good at all?
Yep. Cut it down and paint it with poison.
Like blackberry killer.
Triclopyr is what I use.
Straight, not mixed, like literally paintbrush that straight stuff on.
What I use is this right here. Get yourself a bingo dauber from the dollar store, pop the nib off, pour the ink out, pour your poison in here. That way you've got it on your hip. You can't knock it over and spill it, but I just go in, whack your blackberry, right targeted, right on the cut end right there, and you're good to go. You obviously want to be aware of time. You know, you don't want to be spreading poison when it's raining.
Does that work with ivy too?
It does work with ivy too, yeah. Ivy generally, I mean, ivy's very cathartic to pull up because, you know, it's satisfying, you know, because you'll start with one, like, oh, I got this whole map.
Like,
but eventually when you get to those woody ones where you're leaving behind little root segments, then you make the decision where it's better for you to cut it at the ground and paint it. Also, ivy up in trees, we don't want to let it continue growing, but you don't got to completely clear it out of that upper canopy.
You just have to cut
it at the bottom, clear a nice like 4-foot section, all that ivy goes up, dies off, creates amazing density, awesome bat habitat, awesome bird habitat, all types of critters love it up there. And again, you know, it's generally not gonna girdle your tree.
What was the poison again? Technical.
Triclopyr is gonna be the active ingredient. The over-the-counter brand that I use is from Bonide, and it's just called Stump and Vine Killer Concentrate, and I think it's about an 8% triclopyr.
What about just like 30%?
I don't have too much experience with that.
It's good for thistles and...
Yeah, but in generally, what the issue with using vinegars and salt is that it has a lot of runoff to the overall soil, and it impacts then the overall pH imbalance of the soil itself. Whereas I'd rather use something nasty, but very, very targeted, so that we're only impacting that one plant that we're trying to target. When it comes to noxious weeds, we want to fight dirty, we want to fight to win.
Nightshade, which has just started growing the last couple of years where I live.
Is it a noxious weed?
Oh, it depends on the nightshade.
Yeah, it's
Do you know
growing.
what species it is?
Yeah, because I mean, we do have our native ones that are, you know.
Okay, I guess this grows into waterways and
Does it grow into
yeah.
That's where, especially if we're talking about any type of chemical application near a riparian area, you wanna get the professionals involved.
Right. So basically,
So I
just
can
pulling it out.
give you my best buddy's information, and he can help you out. Oh, and also talk to Skagit Fisheries, because if you're talking about your stream area there, yeah, talk to Skagit Fisheries and see if they can help you out with that. Because there's a lot of, again, you know, who knows where this money's going to go now, but in general, up until this year, there was a lot of money out there specifically for riparian enhancement and habitat creation.
In a weed control class, the first thing they say is if you can pull it out, do that first.
Yeah, so that's why I started
The
just
least
pulling
invasive.
it.
Yep.
What was the orange handle tool you mentioned?
A duck something?
Dig It Duck, and that is trademarked. Dig It is the
Oh.
brand name. These guys are
That one is really good.
What's that?
Is it sharp or duck?
This is not sharp. I do have another one that I basically just use as a linoleum knife. Yeah, and that's great for clearing weed out of in between pavers or what have you. But this guy, and again, that guy eventually will dull out, and I don't keep it sharp. But it's the same idea where you've just got this nice, you know, kind of individual. This guy and the Hori Hori are actually my two favorite just weeding tools, where you can just really get in there and kind of just loosen up the soil and get as much of that, you know, of that root out as possible.
I love the Hori Hori.
Yes.
So good. So good. Yeah, it's pretty much all I use. I mean, like, I use this scoop only for soil out of bags. Otherwise, if I were just digging into natural soil, it'd be all Hori Hori and 3-tine cultivator. And then if we're talking about larger, I've got them back there, but just a spade and then the long handle cultivator there. And again, we want to make sure that the soil is filling in that pore space around the roots, but we also want to make sure we're not compacting the soil. And so that's where wood chips are really good for helping regulate soil absorption and temperature management. And therefore they just really, and I mean, the birds, the bees, the bugs, the fungi all love it. And they will do the work for you of slowly working that into the soil and the ground. And again, just think about it. These are all native plants. They want to be, you know, their native environment is our native forest. And so try to replicate that native forest soil and ground as much as possible. And that's where, you know, start out with a layer of these arborist chips. As your tree grows and you prune it, don't take those branches and haul them to the dump, especially if we're making small caliber cuts. Just take this guy while you're standing there looking at your trees. Just coarse, woody debris on the ground. Let it be.
I was gonna plant that.
Lauren, what's the name of your company?
Mikado Tree Care.
Mikado.
Mikado Tree Care. If anybody would like a card or have
Yeah.
any more specific property-oriented questions, snag my information. I'm all about treating trees with dignity. I'm all about seasonally appropriate pruning. You know, we only prune if we have an objective. There's no tree that needs pruning. It's more so for our human objectives, be it living around the tree or trying to force that tree to do something that we want it to. That's when we can accomplish some of that. Or we can mitigate those conflicts through pruning, intervention, or even just a lot of it is just understanding what your tree wants to be and how maybe we can just shift our usage of space around it to let that tree be what it wants to be. And habitat creation, especially if any of you guys have larger chunks of property, ways that we can do some forestry-minded tree care to create habitat is huge, and I love doing it.
Do you have a card here?
I got plenty of cards here.
I have a question about like an Alaskan cedar.
Yeah, here, if you guys want to just pass them around, it'll work its way to you, and if not, I have more in the truck.
Alaskan cedar that's probably 20 feet tall.
Yeah.
Planted 2 years ago. And it has a main stem
Going
and
this way.
maybe a secondary stem that I didn't notice before. And somebody suggested we cut that secondary one off to allow the main stem to be the main growth. Does it matter at this age? It seems late for me to do that, like age.
I have to see your tree specifically to say what the impact, but think about how much of the green canopy is attached to that one stem that you would then cut away. In general, you don't want to ever remove, it's what's called a pruning budget. You never want to remove more than, the books say 30%, I lean closer to 15 to 20% of green canopy in a tree in one growing cycle. And so backtrack, what do you want that tree to be? That tree naturally wants to have two stems, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't have two stems. But if you are set in mind, I want this to be more of a single-stemmed, upright Alaska yellow cedar, if it's got some conflict of other trees around it that you then want to manage the spread, then potentially taking that off, but what I would probably recommend if it's going to be a large amount of the green foliage that you're taking away in one go, you do a sublimation cut, meaning it might be an ugly heading cut, but in 1 year, take it down by a third. Next year, take it down by another third. Maybe that third year, you finally take that whole stem off.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it. My husband brought the issue to me. I haven't seen it yet, so I gotta go look at it.
But in general, it's never an issue unless you consider it an issue. And so, I mean, the majority of all, I'm working on a talk for the ISA that a couple years down the road I'll probably give, but about solving tree problems without the saw. Again, so much, I mean, again, people scoff at this, but literally if someone calls me up to their property and they say, this giant sequoia that got planted, 2 feet from the house is starting to impact my foundation, my first question is, well, have you gotten bids for moving your house?
I was gonna say.
Yeah, and again, people think that's ridiculous, but again, it's an allocation of values here. You're saying that you value your foundation, which most people probably would make that call, over they value that tree. My role, I believe, is to advocate for the tree, or at least make people aware that when we're making these decisions, we are making these decisions on behalf of our living neighbors.
Yeah, we have 150 or so year old white fir adjacent to our deck.
Ooh.
And it drips sticky on the deck. And my husband wanted to just chop it down. And I'm like, let's just limit up a little and then you'll have fewer drippings on the deck.
As long as you do it at the right time of year, because then if you limit up, then you'll open up those wounds. If you do it in the springtime, then you'll have it all covered. I say, build yourself a nice, beautiful pergola that you can string something over.
I'm like, I'm just going to go out every morning and clean the deck.
Thanks very much, Lauren. It was
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren.